Week number 14 of the 2025 fantasy football season comes to a close tonight on Monday Night Football with the Eagles and the Chargers. In today's video, we're going to be getting a jump start on the Week 15 waiver wire. There are no teams on bye this week. It's the fantasy playoffs for a lot of your guys' leagues, so it's do or die. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down my 12 must-add waiver wire options before week number 15 of the 2025 fantasy football season. If you guys do end up enjoying today's video and you are new to the channel, please make sure that you guys do hit that subscribe button down below like it owes you some money. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 15 waiver wire adds for the 2025 fantasy football season. We begin with my number one waiver wire ad of the week, Blake Corum, running back of the LA Rams, going up against the Detroit Lions this week at home in LA. Currently rostered in 50% of leagues on Sleeper, so if you play on NFL, CBS, ESPN, any other fantasy football platform, then the rostership percentage may be slightly different, though I will note in some cases there could be a drastic difference in rostership percentage from one platform to the other. So Blake Corum absolutely explodes last week up against the Cardinals in Arizona. He's the RB3. They win that game 45-17, 12 carries for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as 1 reception on 1 target for 3 yards. In terms of the snaps, 51% for Kyren, 31% for Corum, and Ronnie Rivers had 17% when he played after all of the starters were pulled later on in the game. Now, in terms of the touches, Corum had 13 for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. For Kyren, he had 15 touches for 97 yards and a touchdown, and Rivers had 8 touches for 41 yards in that game as well. Now, in my opinion, this is still Kyren Williams' backfield, and that does make things very, very dicey for Blake Corum. I am not going to come on here and pretend that up against the Detroit Lions, Blake Corum is this must-start running back. But if you are down bad at the running back position, then Blake Corum certainly does have that upside to have a big game like he had last week. And if something was to happen to Kyren Williams, knock on wood, Blake Corum would be a premier handcuff. Now we move to Ryan Flournoy, wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, going up against the Minnesota Vikings at home in Jerry's World. 2% rostered over on Sleeper. Now CeeDee Lamb is reported to be progressing nicely through the concussion protocol. Since last week's game was on Thursday, it is entirely possible that he does suit up this week. If he misses, then Flournoy would be a guy that you would love to start. If Lamb is back, I would prefer, honestly, not to start him. So it does make things dicey. You definitely want to wait before you, blow your quote-unquote fab wad all over Ryan Flournoy. Pause. You want to wait to see what they say tomorrow on Tuesday before you do so. And I definitely wouldn't look to unload the clip on Flournoy regardless, because, again, if Lamb is back, I don't see any reason how you can really make a strong argument to actually play him, especially in the fantasy playoffs. Wide receiver 5 last week, though, in Detroit. They lose that game 30-44. 9 receptions on 13 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown. Now, in this game, Lamb didn't get hurt 5 seconds into the game, right? Lamb didn't get hurt off Jump Street like Tyrod Taylor up against the Dolphins. CeeDee Lamb played 46% of the snaps, and still, Flournoy had 9 receptions on 13 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown. So 84% of snaps for Pickens, 65 for Flournoy, 52 for Kevontae Turpin, 46 for Lamb, and 21% for Jonathan Mingo. In terms of the targets, Flournoy 13, Pickens 9, Lamb 8, Turpin 2, Mingo 1. Again, don't blow all of your fab on Ryan Flournoy. But if CeeDee Lamb was not to play, then Ryan Flournoy would be a great one week replacement. Now we move to Devin Singletary, running back of the New York Giants, going up against the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders. This week at home in MetLife, 46% rostered on Sleeper. Tyrone Tracy is currently dealing with a hip contusion and a stinger from week 13. If he was to miss, you would be all over Singletary. If he plays, then Singletary is more of a dicey type of start in the YOLO start range that we talk about every week. Now, the Giants were on bye last week, so we got to hop in the DeLorean back to week number 13 for their last game. Running back 7 in that game up against the Patriots in Foxborough. They lose 15-33, 12 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown, as well as 3 receptions on 3 targets for 34 yards. And that is one impressive because, Devin Singletary isn't obviously one of the better running backs in the league, but it's very impressive because of the opponent he did it to. The Patriots have been a defense that is locked down on running backs this season, but we did see Devin Singletary perform quite well against them. Again, 12 carries for 68 yards and a tug, 3 receptions on 3 targets for 34 yards, 12 plus carries in 3 straight games, 10 plus points in 3 of the last 4 games in PPR. So up against a Commanders defense, I feel like this could be a wet dream spot for Devin Singletary. If Tracy was to miss, if Tracy returns, then I would definitely still prefer to start Tracy, but Devin Singletary still would be startable in situations where you don't love your RB2. Then we got Luther Burden, the third wide receiver of the Chicago Bears, going up against the Cleveland Browns. 37% rostered on Sleeper. Rome Odunze missed last week and is far from guaranteed to return from the foot injury based on everything that I've read from the injury last week. Now, I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, so take this with a grain of salt, but it didn't sound great, at least from what I was reading last week, that it was like a guarantee that he'd be back in week 15. Wide receiver 24 last week for Mr. Burden at the Green Bay Packers. They lose 21-28. Very fun game. 4 receptions on 6 targets for 7 yards and 1 rush for 3 yards. He had 6 targets in back-to-back games. And in terms of the snaps, wiki, DJ Moore played 83%, Olamide Zaccheaus 79%, 71% Burden, and the rest were under 5% of the snaps. In terms of the targets, Burden had 6, Zaccheaus had 3, DJ Moore had 3 as well, and Devin Duvernay, the horseman, had 1. So while I think it's very difficult to throw all your eggs into the basket of Luther Burden, especially with Rome Odunze potentially returning and DJ Moore just randomly having huge games every few weeks, I still think at this point Luther Burden should be rostered in your league. Then we move to Kayshon Boutte, wide receiver of the New England Patriots, going up against the no one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills at home in Foxborough. 43% rostered on Sleeper. Now, the Patriots were on bye last week, so we have to look back to week number 13 for his last showing. Wide receiver 22 in week 13 in PPR versus the Giants. They win that game 33-15. He has 4 receptions on 5 targets for 35 yards and a touchdown. His targets and finishes are over the place weekly, right? It's very hard to actually feel super confident in Kayshon Boutte because he could easily this week up against Buffalo get 7 targets just as easily as he might just have 1 or 2 targets. And the craziest thing is, even with just 2 targets, he may get 2 receptions on 2 targets for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? Because that's the kind of player Kayshon Boutte is. He is always going to be a guy that you will not ultimately trust, but the upside is worthy of, getting up to bat and taking a swing on him in the flex spot. In terms of the snaps last week for the Patriots wide receivers, Mack played 75%, Boutte 75%, Diggs 48%, 34% for Douglas, DeMario Douglas, 22% for Kyle Williams, and 3% for Efton Chisholm. So again, while my trust level in Kayshon Boutte isn't the highest, he is a guy that ultimately you can play. Then we move to Jayden Reed, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, going up against the Denver Broncos in Mile High. 47% rostered over on Sleeper for Jayden Reed. In his return game, he had 4 receptions on 4 targets for 31 yards. Wide receiver 32 last week in PPR up against the Bears. They win that game 28-21. 2 rushes for 22 yards as well. In terms of the snaps, 83% for Christian Watson, 81% for Romeo Doubs, 47% for Jayden Reed. The rest were under 20%. In terms of the targets, Watson had 4, Reed had 4, Doubs 2, Matthew Goldenscar 1, and Dontavion John Wicks with 0. So it seems like Jayden Reed is going to be the slot wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. He's another one of these guys that ultimately it will be very hard for me to put a strong stamp of approval on week in and week out, but he is still certainly playable because we've seen the big boom games out of him in the past. And again, that was his first game back, so I expect him to play more snaps and they ramp him up further and further as the weeks go on. Now we move to Jaylen Wright, running back of the Miami Dolphins at the Pittsburgh Steelers. 4% rostered over on Sleeper. Devaughn A-Chain suffered a rib injury on Sunday from falling onto the football. He was adamant to Mike McDaniel that he could have came back into the game, but they didn't let him since the game was already in hand. He doesn't have a fracture, and the expectation is that he suits up against the Steelers on Monday Night Football. Now, it's important to understand that there's a chance that he does not play But again, I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins. I do expect him to be good to go. The Steelers matchup is a wet dream for running backs. So Jaylen Wright is more of a insurance policy, but it is very important to talk about running back handcuffs at this point in the season. We are now in 12-team leagues. Majority of 12-team leagues start their playoffs this week. If you have Devaughn Vele, you need Jaylen Wright. If you have Bijan Robinson, you need Tyler Algier. If you have Christian McCaffrey, you need Brian Robinson. This is the time where the handcuffs become even more important because you don't want Devaughn Vele to miss again and you be left fucked because you do not have Jaylen Wright. So make sure that you go ahead and pick up your handcuff. The time is now, like John Cena's theme song, to pick them up. Running back 10 last week at the Jets. W 34-10, 24 carries for 170 yards and a touchdown. 3 targets as well. 52% of snaps for Wright, 34% for A-Chain, and 25% for Ali. So in my opinion, based on what we have seen last week, Jaylen Wright does appear to be the handcuff for A-Chain if he is not able to go. Again, this is me talking about Jaylen Wright, but also me talking about handcuffs in general. They are very crucial at this point in the season. Before we talk about the rest of the waiver wire ads for this week, though, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. If you're brand new to Underdog, sign up using promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description, you receive a free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus funds, as well as if you play $5 on the pick'em, you receive an additional $100 in bonus funds or in bonus entries. How does the pick'em work? It's incredibly simple. You make at least 2 picks on the higher or the lower. If those picks hit, you get paid. If you do multiple other picks, then the payout will be higher, but all of the picks need to hit. Make sure you guys do check that out. Promo code Notorious, or by clicking on the link in the video description. So now we move to Tyler Shough, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, going up against the Carolina Panthers this week. 16% rostered over on Sleeper for Shough. Quarterback 7 last week at Tampa Bay. They win that game, a shocker. They win 24-20. The Bucks are stumbling. They're bumbling. 13 completions on 20 attempts for 144 yards and 1 interception, as well as 7 rushes for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns. 17 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. I have been pretty negative on Tyler Shough, and I definitely am worried about this matchup up against the Panthers, but his production has been through the roof compared to my and most people's expectations, right? Spencer Rattler was bottom of the barrel dog shit. Tyler Shough is definitely a big upgrade over him. So while I'm never really going to be ready to give Tyler Shough the metaphorical gawk gawk 9,000 special to really put my stamp of approval, Nick loves Tyler Shough, I am ready to roll him out there if you're down bad at quarterback. Speaking of being down bad at quarterback, Shedeur perfect time in Sanders, quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, going up against the Chicago Bears in the Windy City. 18% rostered over on Sleeper for Shedeur. Quarterback 2 last week versus the Tennessee Titans. They lose the game 29-31. We talked about this in the defense to stream video. What a fucking joke. What a joke to take Shedeur Sanders off the field after that drive for the 2-point conversion to win the game, and you're running some trickery like you're playing Madden at 3 in the morning. Sickening. Sickening to see that occur when Shedeur Sanders has such a great game. Quarterback 2, they lose 29-31, 23 completions on 42 attempts for 364 yards and 3 touchdowns with 1 interception, 3 rushes for 29 yards and a touchdown. Dillon Gabriel couldn't dream of doing that even in his sleep. Even if he was to fire up Madden, he's not even throwing for 300 plus yards because Dillon Gabriel fucking sucks. I don't understand why we had to have the, oh, let's go with Joe Flacco. Oh, let's go back to Dillon Gabriel. Oh, man, Dillon Gabriel has to get hurt for Shedeur to come into the game. It made no sense. Made no sense. Shedeur Sanders has scored over 11 points just once in 3 starts. So again, not ready to crown the guy. Not ready to say I trust him. But if you need to start him, the upside is very clearly there based on last week. Next up, we got Darren Waller, tight end of the Miami Dolphins, going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. 42% rostered on Sleeper. Tight end 36 last week in PPR at the Jets. They win the game 34-10, 1 reception on 3 targets for 13 yards. Now, I expect his targets and snaps to increase as the weeks go on. And with the Steelers being the 6th best matchup for tight ends on a per game basis, it makes perfect sense that the game that might go his way with more snaps would be this week. In terms of the snaps last week, 54% for Broncos legend Greg Dulcich. 51% for Mr. Penalty, Julian Hill. If you're a Dolphins fan, you know this guy just loves a nice penalty. And 37% for Darren Waller. So again, while I definitely felt good about Waller last week and he completely fucked me and you guys in the ass if you had started him, I do think things will get better. Then we got Mike Gesicki, tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against the Baltimore Ravens at home in Cincinnati. 5% rostered over on Sleeper. Tight end 2 last week in Buffalo in PPR. They lose the game 34-39 in a beautiful snow game. Joe Shiesty kind of choked, got unlucky too at the end of the game. 6 receptions on 6 targets for 86 yards and a touchdown. 4+ targets in 3 straight games. The Bengals have certainly peeled back the usage of Noah Fant. In terms of the snaps last week, 45% for Drew Sample, 52% Fant, 42% Gesicki, 10% Tanner Hudson. In terms of the targets, though, 6 for Gesicki, 2 for Fant, 1 for Hudson, and 0 for Drew Sample. So again, these quarterbacks really reaching the bottom of the barrel. The tight ends are really reaching the bottom of the barrel because at this point in the season, there just really isn't anyone that's readily available at quarterback and tight end that I really adore picking up. It's kind of like how, a lot of people talk about, man, Harold Fannon's a must fucking pick up tight end. Harold Fannon is only available if you're in like a 10 or an 18 league. Even 10-team leagues, he's probably not available. Right? He is nowhere near widely available, and everyone's going to talk about him like he's just on everyone's waiver wire. He's fucking not. He's been picked up since week 1 in most leagues. Then we got Devaughn Vele, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints, going up against the Carolina Panthers, 44% rostered over on Sleeper. Wide receiver 42 last week in PPR at Tampa Bay. They win the game 24-20, 3 receptions on 5 targets for 40 yards. Over the last 3 games, 2 of 3 with 7 or more targets. I was very excited about Vele last week, and he was all right. He did not live up to my expectations, but I ranked him near the wide receiver 40, and that's where he finished. I just figured, the upside was there based upon what we saw in week 13. And just because of what he did last week doesn't mean that the high upside still isn't there under the shell, right? The upside is still very much there. In terms of the snaps, 93% for Olave, 93% for Vele, London Tipton's cousin, Mason Tipton, 45%, and the rest under 5% of the snaps. Both Olave and Vele had 5 targets last week. So with Tyler Shough emerging, again, I am not ready to crown Devaughn Vele or anything like that, but if you're down bad and you need the high upside, Vele is a guy that has that in him. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you ended up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Leave a like on today's video to help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Love you guys long time. Hope you enjoy Monday Night Football tonight. See you guys tomorrow. As always, good boy.